Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So your wizard is an Order of Scribes wizard? Cool!
You are not cool.
Right at level 2, your spellbook became your best friend. After all, it is smarter than anyone else in the party, doing nice things for you like changing damage types and replacing itself if damaged or destroyed, and your magic quill can whip spells into that book like Ron L. Hubbard whipped out stories before he decided to start a cult instead. And your book decided that its pages were too confining, floating its spectral mind around everywhere in constant telepathic communication with you, sharing what it heard and saw, and blasting your spells through its space. These amazing features were the subject of my last 2 videos, and if you missed them, you should check them out. So I've linked them both in the video description. But enough of those childish games. Your Order of Scribes wizard isn't just a mage anymore, they are becoming an archmage. Or is it archmage? An archish mage. There's 2 higher level features your Order of Scribes wizard may eventually get. I mean, if you ever get to double-digit levels anyways. And I'm here to analyze the crap out of them. The first of those higher level features is Master Scrivener, which is gained at level 10 in the subclass. Here's a quick rundown of the feature. You can make one first or second level scroll from the spells in your spellbook with a casting time of 1 action for free after a long rest. The spell on the scroll is considered 1 level higher when you cast it off the scroll, and if you don't use it by the end of your next long rest, you lose it. Nobody can use the scroll except for you. Also, if you craft scrolls the old-fashioned way, it takes half the time and gold that anyone else would need, because they're morons. Okay, so that is the quick rundown. Now for some deeper analysis. So we'll start with the free scroll after each long rest. It says the spell must be from our Awakened spellbook, so it needs to be one of our wizard spells, which also must be of first or second level with a casting time of 1 action. If we don't use it before our next long rest, we lose it, and it's automatically upcast by 1 level. Now, there are going to be cases where there are these in-game factors that might affect what you want to put on a scroll. Like, you know you're going to be casting Disguise Self multiple times today, well then maybe make a scroll of Disguise Self. But there's going to be lots of times where we don't really know what's going to happen. So we want a nice curated list of options to choose from. So let's figure out what those are. I personally have 3 go-to spells, but I figure I'll show you how I came to those 3. So I figure if we want to make the most out of this feature, we probably want a spell that has some mechanics for casting with a higher level slot. So that's probably where we should start. So here's the list. We got Burning Hands, Catapult, Cause Sphere, Charm Person, Chromatic Orb, Color Spray, Earth Tremor, False Life, Frost Fingers, Ice Knife, Long Strider, Magic Missile, Ray of Sickness, Sleep, Tasha's Caustic Brew, Thunderwave, Witchbolt, Eganazar's Scorcher, Blindness, Deafness, Cloud of Daggers, Dust Devil, Flaming Sphere, Hold Person, Invisibility, Malsassad Arrow, Mind Spike, Rhymes Binding Ice, Scorching Ray, Shatter, Snellix, Snowball Storm, Spray of Cards, Tasha's Mind Whip, Vortex Warp, and Wither and Bloom. So that is 34 spells. We need to shave this down. So let's shave off the spells that are just pretty lousy spells to begin with. And as I look through this list, I see Chromatic Orb, and Color Spray, and Earth Tremor, and Frost Fingers, Ray of Sickness, Witchbolt, Eganazar's Scorcher, Dust Devils, Malsassad Arrow, Mind Spike, Snillux, Snowball Storm, and Spray of Cards. I think we can get rid of all of those. So here's our remaining list. We're down to 22 spells. Now, let's get rid of the stuff that might have been okay to cast at low levels, but we're going to be at least 10th level, so we're probably not going to be wanting to spend an action to cast some of these spells at this level, like Burning Hands, and Catapult, and Ice Knife, and Sleep, and Tasha's Caustic Brew, and Thunderwave, and Cloud of Daggers, and Flaming Sphere, and Scorching Ray, and Shatter, and Wither and Bloom. So let's take those off. So now we're down to 11 spells. Now we have a curated list of spells that upcast, but not a list that necessarily all upcast well. So let's get rid of the spells that don't upcast well, like Magic Missile, Rhymes Binding Ice, and Vortex Warp. So once we get rid of those, we now have 8 spells left. Now when we pick a spell, we want one that we're almost certain to get an opportunity to cast. I mean, if we don't use the spell, then it's like not having the feature. So let's lose the stuff that's kind of circumstantial, like Charm Person, which is humanoids only. Hold Person is humanoids only. Invisibility, I mean, it's a decent spell, but you don't always have a good use of it. And maybe cause fear too. Higher levels and frightened condition immunity and all that stuff. And what are we left with? False Life, Longstrider, Blindness, Deafness, and Tasha's Mind Whip. Now, 2 of these are first level spells, and the question is, are either of these spells cast up to 2nd level enough to compete with the 2nd level spells cast up to 3rd level? Longstrider, maybe. False Life, probably not. And so False Life goes away, and that's going to be our curated list. Longstrider, Blindness, Deafness, and Tasha's Mind Whip. All 3 of these upcast the same way. They add a second target. Longstrider is likely to be the weakest of these 3 options, but it is a spell you can cast outside of combat, so you can 100% use it. So any of these 3 spells I think is a good option. Though, if you have the opportunity to really take advantage of the second half of this feature, I might consider removing Longstrider from this list as well, because we're going to have so many scrolls of Longstrider through the second part of the feature. So, here's what you have to do. You have to make sure a spell that you want to turn into a scroll is in your spellbook. So, when you get to level 10, you add 2 spells to your spellbook, and if none of these 3 spells are there now, you might consider taking one of them. You don't need to prepare it, you just need it so you can make a scroll. And basically, we're going to get 1 additional spell per day, either a 2nd or 3rd level spell, and that's not too bad at level 10. But that is just the first half of this feature. So let's look at part 2. We can craft scrolls with half the time and half the cost. Now, crafting magic items of any kind is ultimately an optional rule. Here is what the Dungeon Master's Guide has to say about player characters crafting magic items. Magic items are the DM's purview, so you decide how they fall into the party's possession. As an option, you can allow player characters to craft magic items. The creation of a magic item is a lengthy, expensive task. To start, a character must have a formula that describes the construction of the item. The character must also be a spellcaster with spell slots and must be able to cast any spells that the item can produce. Moreover, the character must meet a level minimum determined by the item's rarity, as shown in the Crafting Magic Items table. So, first of all, the very first thing the Dungeon Master's Guide has to say on the subject is that magic items are a DM's purview, and allowing player characters to create magic items is a DM option. So there is a possibility that the second part of the Master Scrivener feature won't be available to your Order of Scribes wizard at all. And that is really between you and your DM. So if it's not available to you, I've timestamped the video and you can skip ahead to the 14th level feature, one with the word. Okay, now let's talk about crafting scrolls. So there are 2 sets of official rules for creating spell scrolls. There's the ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide and the ones in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and I will briefly go over each of them. So let's start with the Dungeon Master's Guide. According to the introduction to crafting items I already covered, you need a formula to create spell scrolls. Maybe you can buy them, maybe you can find them, maybe you can develop them yourself, or maybe the DM just handwaves the whole thing. Once you have a formula, you can create a spell scroll for any spell that you can cast and have spell slots for if you meet the level requirement, which, unless you're 1st or 2nd level, won't be an issue for spell scrolls. Otherwise, you'll always meet or exceed the minimum character level required. The time and price of crafting a scroll depends on the rarity, which is determined by the spell level of the scroll. These are the amounts and times required for a non-Order Scribes wizard. A cantrip or 1st level spell scroll requires 50 gold and 2 days of crafting. A 2nd or 3rd level spell requires 250 gold and 10 days of crafting. A 4th or 5th level spell requires 2,500 gold and 100 days of crafting. A 6th, 7th, or 8th level spell requires 25,000 gold and 1,000 days of crafting. And a 9th level spell scroll requires 250,000 gold and over 27 years to craft the one friggin' scroll. An Order Scribes wizard has those amounts and times. So what should be obvious right away is that, except in very rare cases, crafting anything more than a 3rd level spell scroll is wildly unlikely. Order Scribes are not. 1st level scrolls though, 25 gold and a day to craft, definitely doable. But ideally, your DM uses the updated rules in Xanathar's. So with the Xanathar's rules, you no longer need a formula to craft a spell scroll. You just need to be proficient in the Arcana skill, which, come on, we're an Order of Scribes wizard, of course we took Arcana, and have the time and money, provide any material components of the spell, and have the spell prepared, which we can do right before we start crafting the scroll. So here's the chart. And as you can see, it now scales with every level spell, but it doesn't scale nearly so dramatically. Instead of needing 27 years to craft a 9th level spell scroll, you can do it in a little under a year, which is still a lot of time, but it's a lot less than 27. And half all these times and costs for an Order of Scribes wizard. So a 10th level Order of Scribes wizard could produce a 5th level spell scroll in about 2 weeks if they have the gold. What should be clear in either the case of the Dungeon Master's Guide or Xanathar's is that lower level scrolls are way more efficient. And first level spell scrolls are pretty cheap, and you can spit out 2 per day. So if you get a chance to do that with any frequency, you can fill your pouch with long strider scrolls, and you probably won't need to choose that as your free daily scroll at all. Personally, I like producing scrolls for spells that I would never prepare. I mean, unless I'm crafting the scroll, then I need to prepare them for that, of course, but then I will not prepare them again. And I also like to pick spells that aren't rituals, because I can cast those anyways, but I'm looking for the circumstantial stuff, and just have a scroll ready for casting those spells at need. Some examples would be spells like Catapult or Charm Person, Disguise Self, Expeditious Retreat, Fog Cloud, Grease, Jump, Longstrider, of course, Mage Armor, Protection from Evil, Silent Image, Snare, and Thunderwave. Not that you'll necessarily have all these spells in your spellbook, but for the ones you do, they can be hard to fit on your preparation list. So even creating a single scroll of something like Disguise Self could come in handy in a pinch. And you could craft a scroll for each of these spells in a week with an Order of Scribes wizard. Higher level spells like 2nd and 3rd level are also very doable with the time frames in Xanathar's, but the costs might be restrictive depending on your campaign. But if you have the time and the money, look for spells that you have in your spellbook that aren't rituals, and that you don't have prepared but could come in handy in the right situation. Those are the spell scrolls to craft. Now, if you remember my first video about Order of Scribes, where I talked about just copying every spell you could into your spellbook, and that costs money, and then crafting spell scrolls, and that costs money, you will realize that it's going to be pretty tight for money for an Order of Scribes wizard in most campaigns. And if I have to choose between making lots and lots of scrolls or getting more spells in my spellbook, I'll choose getting more spells in my spellbook, and I will get into that later. But if that's the choice, that's the way I would go. But if you got the money and you don't have spells to put in your spellbook, craft the scrolls. Okay, so we've spent levels 10 through 13 crafting scrolls, either in downtime or the one we get for free every long rest. Now it is time for the final Order of Scribes feature, One with the Word. This feature has 2 parts. First part's little. You get advantage on all Intelligence Arcana checks.
Where are they? I think they're talking about us.
So that's the quick one. It's a ribbon, but it fits. The second part is the bigger part. If you're using Manifest Mind, which, let's face it, it's free and it lasts forever, so of course you are. You can use your reaction to avoid 100% of the damage you would take once. In other words, you get hit by that ancient Dragon's Breath weapon, or the Tarrasque scores a critical hit against you, or you fall victim to a deadly trap, or you find yourself in a meteor swarm, and you're going to take a crap load of damage. Well, you use your reaction and you take 0 damage instead. So that is absolute madness, but there are some big limitations. The biggest is you can only do it once per long rest. But you know what? Still pretty good though, right? Here is the other cost. You roll 3d6 and your spellbook temporarily loses spells of your choice that add up to the result in combined levels. In other words, let's say you roll an 18. You could choose 2 5th level spells and an 8th level spell, and poof, those spells are gone from your spellbook, and you can't cast them even if you have them on a scroll. You roll a d6, and after that many long rests, the spells return and you can cast them again. So, here is the workaround. Fill your spellbook with every spell you can. You find Dust Devil, copy it in your spellbook. Mel Sassadero, yes please, copy it in. Legend Lore, you bet, worth copying in your spellbook. Your spellbook has no limit on how many spells it can hold, and you're an Order of Scribes wizard, so scribing spells is super, super fast for you. I mean, here, let's map it out. Let's say we use one with the word every single long rest. And let's say we always roll an 18 on that 3d6, and we always roll a 6 on the duration spells disappear. I mean, that's never going to happen, but that is literally the worst case scenario. So how many spells would we be missing? Well, at all times we'll be missing 18 times 6 levels worth of spells. Every day, 18 come back and 18 more go away. So that's where we absolutely max out. 18 times 6 is 108 levels of spells. You know how long it takes us to scribe 108 levels of spells? Under 4 hours total, all together. 4 hours, not even. And one with the word is paid for forever, no matter how poorly we roll. After that point, go ahead, craft spell scrolls. The key is to fill your spellbook with 108 levels of crap. Witchbolt, sign me up. Circle of Death, sign me up. Investiture of Flame, sign me up. Once we're there, we can basically ignore the penalty. Sure, I'll roll the dice, but it doesn't matter. I have spells to spare. The key is we choose the spells we lose, so we lose the spells that we only copied in our spellbook to feed this feature in the first place. And then it's just ignore damage once per long rest. As a reaction, no additional cost. There's a prismatic wall in my way. Okay, I'm going to leap through it, but you know what? I take no damage. I'm going to break this Staff of the Magi that has full charges. I guess I'll take no damage. And that's the feature. And that was quick. That's one with a word. Solid 14th level feature if you plan for it. And put those all together, and this has probably become my favorite wizard subclass. I think it should be obvious enough if you've watched my last 2 videos as well as to why. So I'll finish up with an optimized build in my next video. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Here are some amazing people whose support allows me to make this content. If you would be willing to support this channel, please click the link to my Patreon page in the video description. Thank you to Awesome Face, Benjamin, Brett McDowell, Christophe de Aristazabai. Let me know if I got that right. Condor, Dash Panther, Dave Peters, David Lotz, David W. Skibbins, Ido, Isaac Leister, James Thomas, Jeremy Brown, Jonathan Lexi, K.J. Aurelio, Kavathe, Leonardo Gonzalez, Marlon Rooks, Migish, Mr. Muffins, Rye Squy, Sadkeone 7, Steven Edmondson, TUM, and the Al Gore Rhythm. And thanks to all my patrons.